All right, good morning. It's the top of the hour. I guess it doesn't have to be the morning, but it's the top of the hour. And you're listening or watching Two on One, the internet's number one show hosted by two theologians of the disciples' variety, talking to a theologian of any variety about his, her, or their pop culture topic of their choosing. Wow, that was an awkward mouthful. Hi, I'm one of your co hosts, the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
And I am your other co-host, the Reverend Stephanie Kendall. And Arthur, it's really good to see you.
It's really good to see you. I managed to wear the same shirt for the third week in a row by accident. So I'm pretty excited that you guys get to see what is clearly my Christmas shirt.
Well, it's Christmas in July, so Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
I love your Christmas shirt. Now I'm going to hold you to it when we hit December. Be like, where's Arthur's actual Christmas shirt?
That will work. And speaking of Christmas in July, as you are well aware of, I'm switching between windows. I'm lighting candles in honor of our 4 weeks of Christmas in July. And you'll see the three are pink. And today is the purple candle.
Ooh, so 2 weeks ago, it was passion, the drive of actuality and promise. Last week was the candle of style in honor of our mutually beloved Catherine O'Hara. And what is this week?
This week, we light the candle of quality.
Ooh, Q for quality. I love that.
Quality, a definitive characteristic or attribute, usually indicative of a degree of excellence.
If we're going to do something, we're going to do it well. We both know that.
Exactly. Guide us, O Spirit, into excellence in your love.
Oh, are you sure you're not a 3 in this space?
I wrote that prayer just for you, honey.
Oh, thanks, boo. Well, and if we are talking about a dedication to quality, we should talk about who, Jeff One Row Designs.
Oh, I was hoping we would.
I knew you were. Jeff One Row Designs is a liturgical textile studio in St. Louis, Missouri, which I believe you've heard of, Arthur, right?
I have.
And celebrating 16 years of making ordinary time extraordinary.
And really extraordinary, like the care and the precision that goes into the crafting of paraments and banners and copes and chasubles and miters and frontals, and of course stoles is evident in everything they make.
I just received my customized stole, as all of our Deuces know, and it is truly perfect. It is exactly what I ordered, handmade, durable, and exquisite.
I bought stoles years ago, like maybe a decade, and they look brand new.
Give yourself a gift this Christmas in July and check out the full catalog of available items and customization options at jeffwonrow.com, jeffwunrow.com. I feel like I'm getting better at spelling that out.
You're doing great. I mean, do it after our show, of course, but really anytime after that, go check it out.
Totally. And our listeners and viewers, you know that you have your own special code. And every month, Jeff tells us exactly how many people are using the code. And we are grateful that all of you are continuing to use the code. And your code is 2on1, all one word, all letters at checkout. That's the big thing. People have asked me, they're like, Smith, where is it? Because I can't find it. You got to do it at checkout. But you'll get 15% off your entire stole purchase.
And that, friends, is the true meaning of Christmas.
Absolutely not.
Okay, it's the true meaning of Christmas in July on 2on1.
Again, it's
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
I turn on my light, and I'm going to let in Qadry. I turned off my overhead light so that you could see the flames. Introduce our friend, please.
I will introduce our friend. Our friend, Qadry Harris, is here to be with us for the Best Man holiday for Christmas in July. Qadry, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for coming.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I love this podcast. I'm a daily, not daily, because I typically I tune in after on the podcast app because y'all typically recording live when I'm teaching, but it's always good to be on 2on1.
And I mean, I don't remember if it's since last time we talked or not, but you have a podcast as well.
Yes. We are Speak Easy, Black Renaissance podcast. You can find us on almost every podcast platform available. What we do is we use vintage jazz and 90s hip hop to discuss issues and topics in Black religion and Black politics. So yeah, definitely give us a listen. Let us know what y'all think.
It's incredible.
Yeah, folks who haven't listened to it, like we will absolutely recommend on the same level as our podcast. Listen to Speak Easy. It is marvelous.
Appreciate y'all.
It is. It really is. And we last week we talked about Home Alone, and we talked about how do we get back into community, and we are a community in which we like to lift up and center those amongst us that are doing it and doing it well. And
100.
so you are one of our beloved guests, as I hope obvious in the fact that when we're like, who can we invite into these spaces? We're always like, let's go Qadry. First of all, because I just never get to see you anymore, and love you and miss
Well, hopefully that's over soon. Hopefully soon. I'm fully vaxxed and everything now. So,
you.
when we get back on this coast, yeah, we definitely got to get up.
Yep, I
Um,
agree.
so I want to catch you up with what's happened so far this Christmas in July, in the event that timing has got wonkety or somebody's watching this for the first time or listening for the first time. What we've kind of discovered after talking about the rather problematic Love Actually and insisting that Christmas movies have to take place like there's a difference between a movie about Christmas and at Christmas, and that Christmas movies are the former, not the latter. And there's always a level of magic present in Christmas movies, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
What The Best Man Holiday is it's an ensemble film. It's a sequel 15 years after the fact, or after
Yeah,
the first
yeah.
one. And is it a Christmas movie?
That is a great question. The movie is definitely about Christmas, or about friends, pseudo family, and I say pseudo for a reason. I hope we can discuss some of that
Oh yeah.
in a little bit. But friends and pseudo family coming together to celebrate the holidays. And it's definitely done during the Christmas season, right? Is it a Christmas movie per se? Um, I don't think so, because there's not really too many explicitly Christian themes discussed, at least in the forefront of the content. But I think that magic aspect that you bring into it, I think, yeah, there's definitely certain elements of magic that come up throughout the story. And if there is any particular Christmas theme that, or maybe it's a non-traditional way of thinking about Christmas, but I think of Christ reconciling love, starting with the Messiah being born and coming into the world, right? That element of uh, divine forgiveness, and even taking on human flesh, right? So yeah, forgiveness is a major theme
There's an
in this film.
It's like an incarnation. It's
Absolutely.
living among and it's living with. And I love that.
Mm.
And that wasn't like a trap question. I'm sorry. It kind of seemed like it. Is this a Christmas movie? Like, no, it totally is. We would have warned you about it.
I think it is a Christmas movie. I mean, I realize that part of like what we keep saying is that if you take the kind of litmus test is like, can you take Christmas out of it and it still holds,
Mm,
and I think that for this movie, Christmas heightens the relational aspect of it in a way that if it were a I don't know, an Arbor Day movie, a movie in which, like there's a random day throughout the year, uh, it would feel normative. It would feel like I know these people, I know the relationship, but I think Christmas lends itself well to the narrative of why things happen. And I think that goes back to the like magic and mysticism that we have named as part of what makes Christmas special.
yes,
Well,
yes.
if Mia sent out cards inviting everyone to like spend the week before 4th of July, nobody would clear the calendar for that. Or
Hmm.
there's not, I can't think of another holiday, maybe Thanksgiving, but even that's a weekend.
Hmm.
It's going to be come together and be in community for a time. And it's what, 4 or 5 days in the course of
Yeah,
the movie. It's got to be
yeah,
Christmas. It can't not be.
yeah. And I think the amount of, and it's ironic, but I mean, we can spoil the movie here, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we're a
Right,
spoiler.
right, yeah, yeah. And it's like, even in light of, the tragic and graphic death that occurs of Mia in the movie,
Yeah.
I don't know if the amount of healing that occurred,
Mm.
and the various relationships in the film would have happened if it wasn't a Christmas setting in the backdrop.
Well, and I think there's kind of some poetic justice may be the wrong, but like poetic relevance to the fact that there is both life and death at Christmas for this community. That being the birth, the life being the birth of Jesus, that there is, that element, and the death of Mia, that there is, that it's, and in the life of, or the evolution of Christ in and of itself, right? That there's very much tied to the understanding of that full circleness that I think this community builds on, and is the backdrop of Christmas kind of just like really lends itself to maybe even more of an existential understanding of like the cycle of life.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off of that, when you think of Mia both dies and is born in the film, right? Because um, the precious child that's born at the end of the movie, they name her Mia, and rightfully so, right? So so I'm convinced. Yeah, it is a Christmas movie.
I mean,
we got there.
Like when Harold Perrineau showed up, I was just like, it's Tybalt, or not Tybalt, it's Mercutio. Yeah. Yes. I just want to point out that like that his interpretation of Baz Luhrmann and his interpretation of Queen Mab being drugs is just my absolute favorite, because it's the weirdest monologue. Anyways, I love Harold Perrineau forever. I loved him on Lost, which is our weird connection for all of the other movies we've talked about.
That is true. That's weird.
Yeah.
We've talked about Home Alone and Love Actually.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Because but just I didn't know he was in the movie, and I was just really excited when he showed up.
So his nickname is, what do they call him in the film?
Merch.
Yeah, and Julian. He's a really interesting character. He really is, because that whole and talking about forgiveness, right? The whole subplot between he and his wife, and at that time the mother of his children, is a really interesting dynamic. I think particularly with black men and sexuality, and the standards of sexuality that we often unfairly place on black women and hold that over their heads for decades.
He held that for 15 years, right? He just had that little resentment planted in him. It
right.
was always there.
Right. And see, that's the thing. If it wasn't, so again, spoiler alert, Murch's wife, Candace, is a former, I guess, would this technically fall into the category of sex worker?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. So she's a former exotic dancer, and that's how they actually met. And I guess at first it was exciting for him. It was intriguing. It sparked something up in him that brought him out of his comfort zone and his shell. But when push come to shove and things gets difficult, it was clear that he had some type of resentment or negative feelings that he harbored over her for that.
Well, and it's when his standing is threatened, not with his friends who already knew, and not with his family who had to have known. It's when his standing was threatened by money and by white people that suddenly it becomes an issue.
Speak on it. Yeah.
Because there is the level of self-loathing that is insisted upon by the racial dominance.
Yeah.
And what we do is it's never going to be enough, but please strive towards this standard I'm going to keep lifting on you.
Yeah.
I think your school is great, but I just found my reason to withdraw support. So I'm an ally only on my own terms.
Only to an extent. And again, I think that a really important theme that you touched there, right? It's even a lot of times white folks that are actually willing to put their money behind pro-black initiatives, right? And those type of white folks are few and far in between. But even then, the support has stipulations.
Yes.
The support is, we'll support you up until the extent that you do say or think something that we don't like or we don't deem palatable.
And therefore, I'm not.
And it's like,
I'm just a boss.
Yeah, right. And I really wish more of our white kin understood that when you're feeling that type of discomfort in those moments are the times when you really need to lean in.
Ooh, amen. Yeah.
It's not the donor's school. The donor's a checkbook. And I appreciated the dismantling of the Madonna or prostitute dichotomy that women are often cast into.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
Julian's,
And
I've written this down, Candace.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that Regina Hall is often named Candace in movies? Like, I think there's like,
Is she?
well,
I,
maybe,
I did not notice that.
I didn't.
but Regina Hall's character is this complex three-dimensional person,
Mhm,
and it
mhm.
comes down to, is it purity or is it impurity,
Well,
quote
I'm
unquote?
sorry, but women's. I mean, women's bodies are not teaching tools for men.
Precisely. And I think rejects
Bingo.
Women's bodies are not teaching tools for society. Women's bodies are our own bodies. Sex workers
Right,
should be free to
right,
do whatever they
right.
want. We need to support them and love them as any other vocational call. And so, for me, that was part of, again, the white supremacy at work and white standards at work in how we that's the wrong word, but
Yeah.
how we, well, maybe no, maybe it's the right word, how we
Right
police
word.
black
Yeah.
women, how we police black women's bodies and black women's sexuality and black women's relationships, and in a way that isn't the same way that we do so for white women. And yeah, it very much, well, in all of that, I was very much like, as the lone woman on this call or in this space, being like, well, we're not props, and we're not social props, we're not relational props, we're just not. And yeah, I don't know, that hit hard for whatever reason, other than
Mhm.
maybe I think that this last year we've seen a lot of people either lean in and say, wow, here's how I'm going to work on myself, and kind of support, and or say, this is my exit out. Here's my reason that I can say, oh, this makes me uncomfortable. Like, sex is not or women's sexuality, especially black women's sexuality, is not a get out of, or is not the thing that pushes, or maybe it is the thing that has pushed white people into their discomfort almost most, to say, I'm not going to support you, I'm not going to fund you, I'm not going to do your things. It's not an excuse to not live into the kingdom.
Mm-hmm. And I think amen to that. And I think particularly for black men, it's just like in a situation like, I don't know, I've never been married before, but I imagine that the appropriate response should have been, oh, you don't want to take your money and shove it. Like, we'll find it somewhere else. Like, you got a problem with my wife being a director of admissions because what?
Absolutely. I mean,
Deuces, like,
and at what point do we not also, so one, we're lifting up sex workers, is this pro sex work show, but also, if she is called into something else like director of admissions, like, why can we not say that's her journey, right? Like, she's in a different place. And why do we lack grace for the journey of black women?
right. And I was a particular,
Why? I mean, I want to say, why do white
um,
people lack grace? Because that is the crux there.
so, and I love that you said that caveat. So I'll add to it. It's why do black men
Hmm.
lack grace for like I, black women exploring their sexualities in ways that go beyond our framework of what a lady should be, right? And it's like,
Yes.
bro, like, get over it,
So let's
get over it.
let's talk
Um,
about Candace, because we're leading up to her
mhm.
anyhow. Candace, the housewife. I know somebody who watches the Housewives because I'm married to somebody who watches the Housewives. I love, like, I would watch the Real Housewives of Westchester. I know it's not a real show, and I'm sad, but I would
But
watch
it
it.
should be.
So Candace and Q have this, not even
Shelby,
Shelby. Oh, I'm sorry,
Shelby is
Shelby. Excuse me. My brain turned over. Shelby and Q have this, not even friends with benefits. It's not even necessarily beneficial. They have a sexual relationship which is at odds, and they're adversaries. And Shelby refuses to participate properly in any relationship she's in. She's an agent of chaos that
mm,
is self-actualized to a degree, but also just hostile because she's hurt. Um,
yeah,
and she is not policed by any men in
at
the
all.
movie. All of the other women almost are, but I would argue that the women are more actualized and more free than the men are. The men are stuck in their relational ruts. The women, God, the fist fight was like real. I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't real, but like I was like, oh no, this isn't a movie
It
fight.
felt real. Yeah.
This is I'm gonna rip your head off.
Yeah.
Well, and I really, so going back, like, just to some of that, like, again, why it rings true for a Christmas movie. This is real life. People are complex, and emotions are heightened at the holidays. And when we gather, and especially if we haven't gathered, it's why, here's my plug for church, it's why we are called to be in community often and consistently, because when you come back together after prolonged periods of time, you haven't journeyed with each other well often, to not be so toxic towards each other in certain ways. And
wait, here's our promo for church. Church, you're gonna be toxic. You may as well be toxic here.
Toxic together. That's
church toxic together.
Church toxic together. But you get to point out your toxicity, you know what I mean? Like, and I mean this at church at its very best, is what that is meant to be, is to say we're all broken people, right? Like to come together and to journey well with that. And so the emotional complexity of these characters, their relationships, just for me, for lots of different reasons, feels very Christmassy, because as a pastor, as all of us know, Christmas is chaotic for lots of different reasons. And it's always people coming being like, I'm going to break up with my so-and-so, or I'm doing this, or I'm making this huge life change, because the emotions are there. And it's the static of the emotional trauma of whatever year it has been, comes to a head so often around the holidays. And I think that again, this is I don't need to convince you all, but I'm convincing apparently everyone, this is a Christmas movie.
100%. And Arthur, you said something really profound about Shelby being free, right? I think there's an aspect of her being in shackles that resurfaces through her resentment of Candace ending up with Julian, right? So it's in the first film, a quick plug for the first film. Candace, Julian is with Shelby. They are building towards some type of engagement thing, and he breaks it off with her when he meets Candace at Lance's bachelor party. And 15 years later, she's still Shelby, that is, still holding on to that type of grudge, and it
actually, she's less
movement activity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Excuse me.
No, go ahead.
Well, no, I suppose, yeah, she's actually in orbit around Candace. Everything she does is in response to that. So no, I beg your pardon. That's a good point.
Yeah, no, but it's speaking to Reverend Stephanie's point about people being complex and these emotions bubbling over and coming up in a particular way during the holidays. It's in every other aspect she seems so free, right? She like does whatever the hell she wants on her own terms, and if anyone has a problem with it, she'll clap back at you. But then when it comes to this particular, I guess, I was preaching on Paul last Sunday in second, so that thorn in her flesh, right? She can't get over this one thing and keeps coming back to it. And that's what eventually led to the fist fight, right? Her blackmailing. Well, I can't take Julian off the hook, because it's like, seriously, black men at this point, like, you have a beautiful wife and children, and you still upset about something your wife did in college. Like, bro, get over it, right? So and it wouldn't have been an issue had he had the emotional maturity to get past the situation that literally has nothing to do with him, right? But Shelby was able to take that and weaponize it against their family in a very, very messy way. Yeah.
So we've talked about it. We talked about Love Actually. We ended up panning it a couple weeks ago, like pretty hard, because it's candy. There's no nutritional value. But we were like, where's the spiritual directors and chaplains in Love Actually who could be like, you're not living into the image of God and what love is or isn't. And then Home Alone, where was the priest walking up to Kevin and being like, where's your parents, boy? And
or neighbors or community members or post person, like who, like, why was there an entire blank community for this child who has been left behind?
and so I wonder
Yeah.
too with the church in Best Man Holiday. I mean, it's
Mm,
there. There is a funeral service.
yeah.
There is a graveside, but I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much because obviously they don't want to do like an hour and a half movie of CPE with Lance. How are you preparing to grieve well? But I don't know. I mean, where's the greater community that all these folks come together as in this reunion 15 years
Hmm.
later?
Hmm.
Where's their ability to grow emotionally or spiritually?
Yeah. So I think, um, yeah, that's a wonderful question. The I don't think it's a stretch to say that the main relationship dynamic that everything kind of sort of hinges upon is Harper and Lance's unreconciled um, beef, essentially, and it's and this one is a little bit more complicated, right? 'Cause, and this was the entire plot of the first movie is
Really?
that Mia, to get back at Lance for his infidelity, slept with Harper, who's his best friend, and Lance didn't find out about it until the day before his wedding,
Yeah.
right? So and it resurfaces again in this film in that they're I guess they're cool to the point where they'll dap each other up, but when it really comes down to it, the type of emotional vulnerability and healing that you're getting at Arthur, I think they weren't there for each other, and it's almost like yeah, that is a major problem for black men in the way we develop into the not most constructive ideas of masculinity, right? That we just have to bottle these things up and not address them and just keep pushing on without date, knowing that we're not okay, right? So it's like even if there was that church community or that spiritual community showing up throughout the film, I'm not sure if Lance would have opened himself up enough to receive the healing that it could have provided. You
Mm.
know, and we saw that come out with all of the men in some respect throughout this film.
How, so I was curious as we're, as you know, watching it, because there is faith and there is religion as part of what's happening, right? But yet we're talking about the ways in which clearly the church has failed this community, right? Like, to say like, oh, but you didn't journey with them well for healing and wholeness, and to say that, what could the church of our churches, how can our churches learn from the church's lack of involvement in that space, to help journey well, particularly with Black men, but maybe men in general, in kind of their understanding of masculinity in the world?
Yeah. Oh, that's a phenomenal question. Um, I think part of it is, and this sounds really simple and basic, but I'm realizing it. We oftentimes don't open up spaces for men to express their emotional vulnerability in ways in which are comfortable for them
Mm.
right now. And obviously, any part of growth, you want to encourage people to be able to step outside of their comfort zone and expand, the spectrums and the scopes in which they can operate emotionally and psychologically and things along that nature. But it's like we have to start somewhere. And I think oftentimes when it comes to um, men not seeing the best ways to model that from other men,
Mhm.
it's it's really difficult and it's really tough. And getting them on a pathway to move forward has to be cultivated intentionally to their unique experiences and their unique traumas and their unique triggers that are going to serve as barriers for them coming to that space. So I think concretely what I would say is lean on the things that we know in order to push people forward, and at the same time realize that sometimes our ideas for how these processes are supposed to go and what the healing is supposed to look like may need to be altered,
Mm.
may need to be expanded, and may need to evolve in order to meet the unique social and emotional challenges that individuals in certain communities have.
Amen.
So within that, and within I think there's absolutely something for Black men. I think there's something for men in the church as
Mm,
well, because we
mm,
Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Dumas is one of the best books. If you've ever wanted to know, like, why is white evangelicalism so broken, it's a great book.
mm,
Um,
mm.
it's but what with there, so there's the scene in the game room early on in the movie, because the white
Yeah, yeah.
Brian, I think his name is
Brian, yeah.
Brian McDonald. I ski in Vermont. Where Brian is there, and they just, like he's I enjoy his character
Absolutely.
because he's just so inoffensively just present. But after giving him trouble, admittedly, Harper starts asking deeper questions
Yeah.
in order to get. Why do I always want to call him Larry? That's not his name.
Lance.
Lance. Thank you.
Yeah,
My brain is flipping over today.
it
Get
happens.
Lance to give him information for this biography he's secretly writing, of course. But I thought, when I was around with all my guy friends, how often would we do that? Like when have I ever said, like, what are your three primary values in life? And those are good questions. When was the last
Those are
time,
phenomenal questions.
and I just want to note, Terrence Howard is my favorite character in that movie, not because necessarily the character is interesting, but Terrence Howard playing Q is the funniest thing in the world, because it's very clear he just does not give a damn. And anyways,
Yeah.
but what does it mean to cultivate intimacy in a way of actually knowing and seeing and understanding one another? I, I think I was jumping.
Yeah.
Or like what, maybe not what, but like how. I'm interested as the, as two men on this call, yeah. What are the roadblocks from keeping you from being intimate with your male friends?
So it's funny. See, I was just having a similar conversation with another friend of mine, and like one of the barriers I think for me personally is realizing that it's difficult to trust men because I haven't seen too many positive examples
Mm.
of masculinity done. So like most of my friends are women, um, but I think particularly right there's this need, particularly amongst black men, right, to often compete with each other and size each other up,
Mm.
and that are just so irrelevant, right? And I think like how we saw that come out in the film, right, was both with Lance, both with Julian, and then with Harper, and well as a particular degree. It's like they get into this competition, like they're the scene where they're jogging together, and Lance makes a jab at Harper's sperm count. I'm like, guys, like why do we need to do things like that? And it's you see those little flare ups happening throughout the movie, and like what it really comes down to is, oh, you have some deep emotional baggage with this person that you don't know how to address and don't know how to get past.
Mm.
So a constant, thorn in the possibilities of the relationship. And yeah, I think a lot of us just either don't know how to or don't want to
Mm.
venture that road with other men. Whether it's we're afraid of looking soft, whatever that means. We're afraid of, um, and it's not healthy. It's really not healthy at all. And I think a lot of times we'd rather avoid that pain that's often associated with healing or growth. So we just operate with these surface level relationships.
And I think that, oh, go ahead, Arthur.
Oh no, please, Biff.
I was just gonna say, like, and I think the church has really failed in spaces where we've said, here's men's ministry, and not required, those spaces to be one of vulnerable, right? Like, why is it not fostered into saying, here's what community means, here's a space in which you guys can practice and lead and be all of these things to each other,
And
and
what are the fruit
yet,
of the
like,
spirit?
Right. Rather than being like, here's a Bible that has saws on it or
Yeah,
whatever,
tear this phone
right?
book in half to show how much you love Jesus.
Right. And it's like,
Yep.
whereas like in the women's spaces, it's kind of the opposite. It's like you don't need the tools to be brave and strong and courageous and all of these things. It's like talk to each other about the emotional vulnerability of what it means to be in a female or woman's body or a woman identified in this space. And so, and both toxic in their own right. The church has really failed that space.
And
Yeah, time and time again. And as I'm hearing both of you talk as a faith leader, I'm like, oh, how do I as a church leader, open that space up? But also then I was like, if I were to be like, here's a gathering for men or whatever that, and it's going to be facilitated maybe even by a woman to like help foster some of these conversations. I don't even know that they would would men even show up, because we have not given socially the space to say, this is something that you need, right? Because so much of what we do, we go to church because we need salvation, not because it is inherent in community at the church level. We go to places and do things because we need and want, rather than because it is part of who we are. And so how do we get men to understand that part of who you are is vulnerable and beautiful and soft, for whatever that means, and to explore that in a space like whatever this group would be, is something that would benefit the wholeness of who God has called you to be.
Yeah.
I think too, and I agree with 100% of this. We're letting culture define in the church rather than letting church push back on culture.
Okay.
Talking to my marvelous daughter about masculinity, like boys don't cry. The only emotion boys should have is anger. I mean, I didn't get to wear the clothes I wanted to wear when I was in middle school because I didn't want to get my ass kicked every day.
Yeah.
Boys can only do certain sports. Boys can only do certain sports. Well, like there's these weird balances that instead of being a place, it's kind of the same idea with anti-racism work in the white church, where I've had conversations with folk where they're like, well, no, the Civil Rights Act passed. There is no racism anymore.
Jesus.
And I was like, the Civil Rights Act passed 10 seconds ago. That's how they're like, what are you talking about? It's the idea of, you have to be able to see the toxicity. You have to be able to see the systemic issue before you can address it.
Yeah.
And I think the trick is how to open people's eyes. So I'm gonna throw out something from the movie. Aha.
Please.
Robin is this symbol of new life gestating. It's the birth pangs of what can come. And of course the baby is named Mia, and I was kind of hoping the baby would be born on Christmas Day, but like I get why they put it off a few days. So the baby is breech, and they know it, and there's a danger to it, and they know it.
Yeah.
And Robin refuses to be sidelined in her life, right? Like she cooks the meal, she's there, she's present, she has agency over her body. And it is when she is in the throes of labor, right? That is when Lance and Harper have to reconcile.
Absolutely.
And they have to reconcile on intimate terms. They have to reconcile.
Yeah.
They have to reconcile on personal terms. So what would it look like for the work of reconciliation to be birthing something every time it's done, instead of more book studies or more weird panels that sometimes work and sometimes don't? Like dream with me for a minute on that. How can you birth things?
Yeah, so I think that's that scene was, and there was brilliant comic relief woven into it. Yes, like the craziest road rage, but that's New York things, and um, but no, seriously, I think if we want to reimagine, because it's like I really think I don't think they wanted to reconcile, but I think they realized they needed to because life was on the line, right? And I think seriously, a lot of times for those of us, especially like cis hetero black men that have grown up in environments where we have like toxic masculinity is the norm for us, right? Like understanding that if we don't reconcile beyond these things, no, like life is literally on the line here. There are people unnecessarily dying because of these things. We are not living into the fullness of who God created us to be because of these toxic elements in our daily way of going about things, right? So, in a very particular targeted way, Lance and Harper had to reconcile because Harper's daughter and his wife's life were on the line. Like, can we really come into these healing moments understanding, yeah, if we don't get this right, our life is going to be impacted in not the most positive ways.
It is a matter of
Until
life and death.
100%. 100%. And it's like maybe leading with that conversation to even encourage men to lean into these type of spaces. Because I completely agree with you, Reverend Stephanie, that you package something that way and they're going to be like, I'm good.
For sure, as they should be, because like, this is why I'm hoping that, it's generational, right? So like the children that are coming up, we're hoping to lean in and say, like, everyone cries and everyone has these emotions, and there are birthing people, and and all of these things, and because no, we're not going to change. You're not going to get a bunch of old boomers, and this is not anti-boomer. I just mean it in the way in which you've lived an entire 60 plus years of your life being told this, so I don't fault you for it.
There's a lot to dismantle if it's going to happen. And
yeah, absolutely. Whereas like we're hoping to help these younger people to not have to do that as much. And I think that is possible when we think about, and I talk about this often, but like, I'm in my family home right now, but like, I live far away from my family. I live far, and I'm a single woman. So my family, and I don't mean this as air quotes, because I just mean it in real familial terms, in the way, like, I consider both of you two parts of my chosen family. And for me, chosen family and biological family are one and the same. They have functioned differently in my life, but I don't love or invest in them any differently. And I see that well in this cast, that after, just in the fact that it is a 13-year-old sequel, right? That like, there is chosen family that regardless of, once you choose them, regardless of that journey you take, they're still there. And there's something important in the fact that even though there is anger and distrust, and even sometimes I think malicious intent, there is a chosenness there and a familialness there that is imperative to the human condition. And I'm wondering how you both see that as kind of informational to what the church's mission and vision is.
Well, maybe that's the chosen people. It's the people who choose each other. I mean, I like that Candace showed up. Not Candace, Shelby showed up without cameras rolling.
Yeah.
Shelby showed up as Shelby in all of her hot messiness, but she showed up without, it was the one person who violated the covenant was Harper. He went in there with not malicious intent, but he went in there with a secondary motive.
I think it was a little malicious.
It was a little.
And I think, like, seriously, it's men learning and understanding how we need to be honest with each other, right? Because it's and I don't know, how hindsight is 2020, but had he gone into that essentially family vacation and approached Lance and said, "Hey, I have this idea for this particular project that would be essential to the well-being of not only my career but my family dynamic. I understand we're not on the best of terms. What do we need to do to get back to where we were, if that's even possible? What do we need to do in order to move past this really ugly beef that's been happening, that's been going on between us for the last however many years? Can we get right? What can we do to make ourselves right?"
Well, I think that's the part of the question, right? And and we see this happen in lots of different ways. Is forgiveness possible?
That, wow, that's heavy.
Forgiveness has to come from loss. It is not until Mia has died, even though her dying breath just about is telling Lance, you have to forgive him, you have to be together, this has to work. It is Mia's death that manages to bring them together. And I'm sorry, I had to throw this out there because it was my favorite scene. Harper just owned his mistake.
Booyah!
Did not offer
Yeah.
a word of explanation. He did not justify it. I would have said, "Look, I'm broke. My last novel sucked. I have a kid coming. I need to write this up." I would have said so many things to justify it, and all he did was own it.
Yes. And I think I often struggle with this. Is forgiveness possible? I always believe forgiveness is possible because I believe in divine majesty. I believe in the all-encompassing love of the Holy Spirit. It's the doctrine of providence, right? And
Mhm.
salvation. And at the same time, I do think there is a human element that goes into that where, yeah, we gotta own our mistakes.
Well, I think that that's where we've weaponized grace.
Mm, mm,
We have weaponized grace at the expense of true forgiveness.
yeah.
And,
Um,
and grace, by definition, has absolutely no merited claim on it.
Mm,
If
yeah.
there's, I don't know about y'all. I know that I have caused plenty of problems and
yeah.
I've thought in the back of my spirit, but I have every right to do so. Or it's understandable. Or,
Mm,
judgment
mm,
comes with
mm,
us simply owning it.
mm,
And that's where grace is found too. But
yeah. No, no, I think you're spot on, brother. I think you're spot on.
can we
And
get eschatological about the best man holiday? I love this.
as the three of us are wont to do in either on camera, or this is why I keep telling our Deuces, just so you know, before we were rolling, I was saying I can't wait for Qadry and Arthur to meet in person, as two people that have occupied very different spaces in my life, but whom I love very deeply. I can't wait for the two of you to meet, because this is how Qadry and I became friends. We'd have a cocktail and some fried calamari, and then
yep.
like wax poetic about the world.
Oh,
Um,
Audrey, I have theories about Count Basie and Biz Marquis. I'm just talking crossovers are real things here.
Oh yeah, listen, man. Oh yeah, I'm with it. I'm with it. I'm with it. I'm with
Um, so I do we have time for one more? Or we
yeah,
have
do one more. Yeah.
I so I really did like this movie and I just loved it. And I liked how awkward and beautiful the dinners were.
mm,
I talk about Terrence Howard and how Q was probably cathartic for him in this, because Terrence Howard was James Rhodes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He was War Machine, right? And then he just suddenly wasn't,
Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah,
because I think he wanted better pay for the work he was doing and like the 10-year contract they were pushing him into. So Marvel just didn't. Um,
yeah.
and Q has this "leave me the hell alone." Not "leave me the hell alone." It's "I'm going to do what I want." And there's like this: is he phoning it in, or is this his character? And I just love it. I'm sorry, that's all I have to say. Like I just love how filthy
Yeah.
he is.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say I love anytime people eat in movies for whatever reason. I like to I take notice, and maybe it's because the table for me, communion table,
Mm, mm,
is the place in which the very first time I stepped into church at all, uh, and was welcomed forward. I was like, oh, this is what it's about, right? And so like, and Jesus's miracles are primarily feeding people, and that this is when we watch movies like this, in which familial meals and just eating is part of it's the nutritional part of a movie.
Mm.
yeah.
And I think that it's really beautiful that I take notice. I don't know. So when I'm as Arthur was talking about that, I was like, ooh, that's just, I'm with you on that, because I think that there's something honest. We need to eat. And so there's vulnerability in just eating with each other, showing that our bodies need something besides spiritual and emotional thing. Like there's a physical nature to the connectedness in all of us.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And it's funny you mentioned the vulnerability and how it comes out at the table. It's in so many different respects because he's often the comic relief.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Like that scene with the phone was hilarious when he spikes the phone because um but no it's I thought Terrence Howard's character Quentin he's probably the most genuine character uh in the film and I think in many ways it was a redemption story for him because in the first film he was kind of like the pot stirrer
Hmm.
uh, that led to the ultimate conflict, the climactic fight in the first film, right? And then in this one, he's still very much his aloof, goofy. I
Aloof
don't,
is the word.
and at the same time, his heart is just so big,
Mm.
and it shows up for Harper in ways that, like, he had every reason if he wanted to be petty, and like this is part, like, let's concretely about how black men can be better, right? How we can live into the healing, into the salvation. Um, when you have at least in your mind every justified reason to be petty to someone, especially another man, here's an idea: don't do it.
Well,
Act in the exact opposite way that you think you could in being
mm,
petty. And I think that's exactly what happened between him and Harper. And that, and at least narratively, the way I remember the story, like, helps the healing start to roll
Well,
between the entire community dynamic.
vulnerability leads to healing.
that's it.
Consistency leads to healing.
Yeah,
There's a part of that in which if you can show up consistently, you know what to expect, and therefore you can move forward with vision rather than, because if you don't know what to expect, if you haven't surrendered in your inconsistency, then you can't actually cast that vision to for sustainable growth.
yeah,
Is that fair?
Mark
100.
called him an asshole in the car, and it wasn't. Q didn't disagree with it, but Q was hurt because he'd been vulnerable and open, and he had to shift his tactic at that point. I loved that scene.
Yeah.
Also, I'm going to fight people in cars doing monkey paw from now on. I don't know what that is, but it's just like they were just. It was good. We are cognizant of the time, and as you know, Quadri, this is your third.
Third.
Third. You are
Third's the time.
This is Christmas in July for our folks. Whitney Waller with 4, Qadry Harris with 3, Carrie Tannehill with 2, and Laura next week with 1.
Yeah.
The countdown to Jesus in August. Anyways, it is your
Love
third
it.
year. You know our last question. And you know Spiff asks it beautifully. So
Yes, please.
to you.
Q, thank you again so much for being consistent and showing up and vulnerable and honest with us. We love you.
Glad to be.
Also, I was like, I love that you love to bring us sequels. Like, you brought us Power. You did Black Panther at the beginning, but even Black Panther in and of itself is a little bit of a sequel in those Marvel spaces. And so I love that you bring us continued stories.
I appreciate that.
I think that that's a really, and I don't know that you're intentional about it, but I always really like to watch sequels and things because I like to see that there is continuation in our stories and all of that. And with that in mind, as we continue the story that Jesus continues to tell to us, what biblical story, narrative, theme, character are you most reminded of in Best Man Holiday?
Yeah, this one is tough because I think it can show up in so many different places and so many different characters. But I'm reminded of, especially this being a Christmas movie, right? And the innocence of a child is what reconciles humanity to God, right? And now I'm drawing a blank on Lance's and Mia's daughter's name.
Oh.
Uh,
That's okay. We'll look it up.
so when Harper first arrives, one of their daughters has a conversation with him, and she just approaches him and says, "My mom is happy now that y'all are around."
Her name is Hope, I think. Faith or Hope or Grace.
It's one, yeah, and it was a very much a very explicit Christian theme. That was her name, and that was the jolt that went into Harper's head where he started thinking like something's off here,
Mhm.
right? And then it was, does Mia look thin?
Mhm.
Huh? Did you notice that? Like, her hands are shaking and things like that, and it's like, in many ways that set off the process of healing, right? Where a kid just making a simple observation about their parents' happiness leads to, even in the midst of death, leads to the possibility for so much healing, so much new life, right? I thought was Like, yeah, this is the incarnation.
Oh, I like that.
Oof. Yeah. Arthur, how about you?
Okay, this requires a little bit of buildup. Reading the Christmas story, the Magi are outsiders, while they come into a very specific culture with specific understandings. I want to talk about Brian McDonald, who skis in Vermont, because he is the Magi in this story. And what I like about him is he's not trying to be anything but who he is, and he's just living in community until he's not.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's no, I'm being awkward, or I have to name hospitality, or I have to try to be who I am not. And that's really the gift. And he says to, I want to say Candace, because I always do, Jordan. He says to Jordan, I love you,
Hmm.
but he shows it the way he knows how to show it. And it's
Yeah.
different, but it's the same. It's good and it's
Hmm.
similar and it's awkward,
Hmm.
and they're the Magi.
Interesting. I like it. You did
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with as scripture is written by Black and brown people for Black and brown people of a certain time and era. I saw the relationship between Lance and Harper in the relationship between Luke and Theophilus.
Okay.
And in that there is a story to be written, probably was not written. I mean, there was consent there, but also without consent, you don't get, the author gets to have its own liberty of what is said and what is shared. But it really came to a head for me at the when Lance later says, but God is always there when we need him. I don't do, masculine
Right.
God, but
Right.
that's a different thing. We're all entitled to our own vision of God. And so but that is the story of Luke. That is what Luke does for Theophilus, is to say, and Theophilus, I think, does for Luke. When we look at the writer and reader as a symbiotic relationship, and we think of Luke and Theophilus as one in the same relationship that teaches each other about what God is doing and how God is present.
Yeah.
That there are challenges, there is brokenness, there is consistency, and that there is love. That is really the Harper and Lance relationship for me.
Mm.
That
That
is
was good.
great.
That was
I mean, that
good.
assumes Theophilus is a real person, but I love it.
It does. I mean, it assumes a lot about a lot of things, but I think Scripture assumes a lot about a lot of things too. So
I think we have brains and souls, so we're allowed to do what we will with them. Okay. Qadry, thank you for once again being just one of the most outstanding guests we could ever hope
I
for.
appreciate you both. I appreciate you.
You are our
Merry Christmas.
you're our
Merry.
Christmas in July gift. That's what you are.
I
Uh,
love it. Love it.
so we are. I'm going to put up our promo. You think I would remember this by now with Christmas and such? I have to hit this button and this button.
Jeff Monroe is the gift that keeps on giving.
It really is. Those still steal the show. Check out jeffmonroe.com. Next week, we are doing our final Christmas in July episode with Laura Blackwood Pickerel as she talks about Die Hard.
Is it a Christmas movie? Let's find out.
It is a Christmas movie, but we will find that out. Spoilers abound. This has been 2-on-1 Qadry. Thank you again and again and again. And
No doubt. No doubt.
peace.